Thank you, Michelle, and welcome all friends here to a new session of Living Theosophy. Welcome also those who are joining us on the internet. Thank you for joining us. And as Michelle was saying, during this month we are going to explore the journey of the soul through life and death and all the experiences in between. We are going to explore what happens during life, what's the purpose of life, and also what happens after we die, what processes we are engaged in, and why, what's the purpose of that aspect of existence. Because the idea is that existence has these two aspects, life and death. So they are both part of existence, the existence of the soul. So we are going to explore this point of view, which of course is very complex, and we cannot deal with all the complexities in these lectures. But at least I'm trying to point out two things that are useful for our spiritual practice. So there are many things we could say or explore about these subjects, but I'll try to focus more on things that may help us understand why we are here. Of course, also I'm presenting this from the Theosophical point of view. There are different traditions. Probably the core teachings of most traditions is very similar, although they may change in the way they explain it. But there are differences in the details. And the differences are, I think, tools to encourage in people the right attitude. For example, Christianity nowadays doesn't believe in reincarnation. It is said by many that reincarnation was part of the teachings of Christianity at the beginning of our era. But one problem with reincarnation, for example, is that if you don't understand it properly, you may say, well, to be a good person is too hard. I'll leave it for the next life. In this life, I will just, enjoy life and do whatever I want to do. I have many opportunities in the future. So if that is the attitude, and somebody comes and says, no, you don't have many opportunities. You better do it now or never. That will make you put all your attention and strength and ability to live a spiritual life in the present moment. So there is a reason why a particular tradition may discard reincarnation. After all, if reincarnation exists and you thought that it didn't, but you led the right kind of life, then that will be beneficial and you will reincarnate again, and you may in that life encounter the teaching of reincarnation or not. But the idea is that whatever belief we have, how that belief helps us to lead a better life. Now, not knowing about the theory of reincarnation also has some problems. Reincarnation explains many things that the idea of having only one life doesn't. So it is also, any theory that you embrace will always have a bright side and a shadowy side, because every theory is limited. So, for example, we see that there are many differences among people. If you think that God creates a soul for each new person, you may think, well, this soul is said to be a son of God. God is our Father. So he creates a soul to send it to a family that is completely unhealthy, dysfunctional, the parents are in drugs. And so he sends his son, this soul, to that family, knowing that this soul will have a very hard time, knowing that chances are that this soul will become, something similar to the family. And then just because this soul couldn't get beyond the environment, when that person dies, that God would condemn that soul to hell for all eternity. So that doesn't make sense to many people, And as a parent, you would think, I would never send my kid to live with a family like this. So how could God do that? And even if he could, how could he be so harsh in the judgment of the life that this person led? So then also we see all different kinds of opportunities that people have. Some people have a lot of, whatever, health, intelligence, or money, or whatever it is. Some other people are very deprived. So why is this? Why is it random? Is it that, there is a whimsical God? So the theory of reincarnation explains this situation. Not only reincarnation, we have to take into account the whole worldview, which includes what in the East is called karma, or the law of cause and effect, and also includes the post-mortem processes, the afterlife, and what happens there. So if you ask me, I think the theory of reincarnation, well understood, is very useful. And at a certain point, we are meant to transcend any theory, because after all, a theory is just a mental interpretation, but it may help us to generate the right attitude. Once we generate the right attitude, we learn how to live in the right way just because it is the right thing to do. And when I say right, I'm not saying right according to somebody, but to the best of our perception. So let us start. This series is part of a basic or course on theosophy that we are developing. So what I'm talking about tonight, presuppose that you have more or less an idea of what we talked in previous series, but I will do a kind of summary so if you didn't see the previous ones, you can understand it. All the series are on the internet, on their online programs, Living Theosophy series, so you can watch there the previous talks if you want. But the idea, we explored the constitution, or how human beings are composed, if we want to put it that way. Who are we? Are we only the physical body? Are we our mind? Is there a soul or a spirit? We already dealt with this, and what we said is that there is in every human being a divine spark. This divine spark, in the theosophical literature, is sometimes called the monad. Monad comes from a Greek word that means one. And this divine spark is universal. It's not, it's not that there is one monad in each person. From a certain point of view, we can say that. We can say each one of us has a spark of the divine. But the real nature of this is universal. There is one divinity. So let us call it spirit. This is what in Theosophy is called spirit. So there is only one spirit, and we all share the one spirit. Actually, we all are nothing but differentiations of the one spirit. And these differentiations are illusory. Just like when you have here in the room, we have all different colors. But all these colors come from one light, the one white light. And as they bounce off different kind of material, they appear with different, tonalities, with different colors. But there is only one light in the whole room that is the source of everything. So that would be the spirit. Now this spirit projects, if we want to see it in this way, innumerable rays. And each one of these rays become what we could call the soul. These rays, this is also, we explained that in the theosophical view there are different planes of existence. We have a physical plane, which is the one that we perceive through our physical senses. There is also an emotional plane, which is where all the emotions takes place. You go to a particular place and you can many times feel like the emotional atmosphere. You feel peace, or you feel restlessness, or you feel sadness, because there is such a thing as an emotional dimension or plane. There is also a mental plane, there are spiritual planes. The divine spark sends rays into all the different planes of the universe, and at the level of, let's say at the level of the soul, I don't want to introduce the planes here, it forms what in Theosophy is called the higher ego. The word ego comes from the Greek, and it means I-ness. In Theosophy, we use the word ego for the soul before the modern psychology was developed. Today, when people say ego, usually they think of the psychological ego, the lower ego, which is in spirituality seen as something that has to be transcended. But in Theosophy, the idea is that, yes, there is a lower ego, which is a reflection of the higher ego. This higher ego is not selfish. This higher ego is the source of our sense of I-ness. We feel we are a manifestation of consciousness because there is this higher ego. So we explored all this in previous talks. I'm just doing a summary. Now, this higher ego sends also a ray to even lower planes and forms what we can call the personality. The personality is what we know about ourselves. Our minds, our emotions, our body. So we could call this is like the body-mind complex. So we have the body-mind complex, there is a soul, and there is a spirit. So briefly put, that's more or less how Theosophy sees a human being. Of course, there are subdivisions on all these levels until you get to 7 principles, and those are again subdivided, but that's not necessary for tonight. So the idea is that this divine spark is universal. It's divine. Now, why does the divine spark go down into denser planes, into more material planes? And the idea is that this universal spark is not self-conscious, as we already explored in the past. There is this divine spark is in eternity, but not necessarily self-conscious in the sense of saying, I am the divine. So part of what is aimed at in the process of evolution is to develop this sense of self-consciousness. I often put the example of the difference between a baby and an enlightened being. The baby doesn't have a sense of ego, personal ego, because he has not developed it yet. He's in a state of unity. He doesn't even know that his body is different from his mother's, but that state of unity is completely unconscious. An enlightened being, he doesn't have an ego either. He also has a sense of unity, but he's perfectly conscious, perfectly aware. So that's more or less a difference between the monad when it begins the process of evolution, this divine spark, and at the end, the divine spark is still divine, is still one, but there is this self-awareness of that fact. So it is by developing, as I said, this higher ego is the sense of I-ness. There is no I-ness at the level of the divine spark. But on the lower planes, where separation begins to appear, the sense of I-ness appears. If we are all one, there is not sense of I-ness, because the sense of I-ness can be only when you are different from something else. So you say me and what is not me. So you need separation to generate a sense of I-ness. This higher ego is on a very high plane, but separation begins there. And there is a sense of I-ness, but it's very spiritual. On the lower planes, our personality, our mind, emotions, body, there is a very sharp sense of separation. I am different from all of you. So there is a much sharper sense of I-ness on this plane. So the idea is that what the divine spark needs to do is to go through all this separation, generate this sense of I-ness, and then it has to realize that this I is not really separated from the rest. So we could say at the beginning of the process, when the divine spark incarnates for the first time, we have an entity similar to what we would call a caveman. And at the end of the process, we have a Buddha or a Jesus Christ, an enlightened being. So how can we attain, or how can we go from a caveman to an enlightened being in one particular life? That is a very, very lofty goal. So in this particular view, if you don't have the view of evolution, I guess you could say, well, one life is enough. What's the purpose of life if you don't have the idea of evolution? I don't know. We are born here. We are meant to be good people. If we are good people, we die and then we enjoy eternal life. But if you see all the differences that are there, why is there a caveman and a Buddha? Then you need this idea of the process of evolution. And obviously, to accomplish the whole transformation, you need many lives, many opportunities to grow. So that's the idea about reincarnation. Reincarnation is the way that the divine spark, by repeated experiences, can develop all the potentialities that are there at the beginning. And for that, it needs a lot of experiences, as we are going to see. Now, the second question, or the second aspect that I want to discuss is, what is it that incarnates? The process of reincarnation means to come back to an embodied form. We have, obviously, the divine spark is not embodied, it's, as we said, the unity. The higher ego is a very spiritual state, which doesn't have also a body. So reincarnation means the entity that reincarnates is the higher ego, which takes a particular mind, a set of emotions, and a particular body. We are going to see all this process as we advance in the series. Right now, I'm just trying to point out to the purpose of reincarnation, not necessarily the mechanism. We are going to see all that. But the idea is that the entity that incarnates is our soul. Let us call it soul. Our soul is the entity that reincarnates. And in that process, it's not the whole soul that incarnates. It's only a ray of the soul that incarnates. In other words, the expression of the soul through our physical brain and body is very small, because the soul is in itself a spiritual entity. But when that spiritual entity has to express itself through the forms, it can express only a fragment of it. That's why people who have some spiritual experiences, they feel their spiritual identity so different from their personal identity. They feel one with everything and a lot of wisdom and this and that, because that's what the soul is. The soul in every one of us is a very spiritual entity. But when the soul incarnates, it gets constricted by a particular body, a set of emotions, and a particular mind. So it is only a ray, let's say, of the soul that incarnates. And what never incarnates or reincarnates is a personality. The personality lasts since we are born to a stage in the afterlife where the last bit of the personality is dissolved and the essence of the personality is assimilated by the soul. We are going to see all that. But the personality does not reincarnate. That is, if my next life is a woman, let's say Mary, it's not Pablo that becomes Mary. Pablo disappears. Mary is another expression of the soul. So there is no personal reincarnation, there is a spiritual reincarnation. Now, the question is, who are we? Do we reincarnate? When we say we, who are we talking about? If I'm talking about my body, no, my body is not going to reincarnate. The next body will be completely different. So people say, why don't I remember my previous lives? Well, the current brain had never the experiences of the previous lives. That was a different brain that we don't know anything about. The entity that went through all the reincarnations is a soul. But at the level, unless I have access to the soul, at the personal level, my brain has no idea what the previous incarnation was. My emotions, my mind, is also dissolved. That's not what reincarnates. In the past, I may have been, as I said, a woman. If in this life I like science and concepts, in my previous life I may have been completely, or not I, the previous incarnation may have been completely devotional, hating anything that has to do with concepts. Each personality is different from the previous one. Now, for example, if we are attached to our body, to our appearance, if we are attached to the way we feel the world, to our ideas, when we die, all that will be gone. Just like the material things. We may be attached to our house, our car, our money, but we know we die and that's gone. Well, the same happens with our identification with the psyche, that is with our mind, our emotions, our body. That will be gone because that's external, that's not what we really are. It is just like in a dream. You have a dream. Let's suppose in that dream you are dreaming that you are a soldier. You are not really a soldier, but you are dreaming that. And it may be even a nightmare. You are being chased and killed. And then you wake up and you are really relieved that the dream is over. Now, when you wake up, you don't cling to the dream. You don't say, oh, I want to be that soldier. You say, oh, that was an illusion. I'm glad that I'm not the soldier. Well, the soul many times feels the same when the personality dies. When the personality dies, let's say Pablo dies, the soul says, oh, that's gone. That was just a passing dream. I'm glad I'm myself again. I'm glad that I'm the soul again. But you may have also a lucid dream, a dream where you are aware of yourself. Even if you are dreaming, you know who you really are. You are not caught into the character. So when you wake up, you retain the same sense of I-ness. You are yourself, you go to sleep, you are dreaming, but you have a lucid dream, so you are still there. Then when you wake up, you have this memory that, it was you. So that is what happens with spiritual people, and that's why the spiritual path is important. Because if we begin to identify ourselves with what we really are, then yes, we survive death. because we are identified with the real in ourselves. But if we are identified with the unreal in ourselves, when we die, that unreal will disappear. And the soul will be happy that the unreal disappeared. So, what is the real in us? The real in us, the manifestation of the real in us, is what most religions or spiritual traditions say that we should do or feel. Any feeling of love or compassion or interest in doing the right thing, all those things are part of the consciousness of the real in ourselves. Some people may feel that their emotions want to do something, and they are completely identified with the emotions, so they will just do it. In people who are interested in spirituality, there is usually at least this conflict where we see my emotions want to do this, but something in myself is telling me this is not the right thing to do. Even if we do it, there is something in myself that says this is not the right thing to do. That sense of I should do the right thing, that is the real in ourselves. But if we just are identified with the emotions and do something that is not right, then we are identified with what we are not. And all that is going to die. All that is going to disappear. So the spiritual practice, what it does, is to begin to help us identify with what we really are and start breaking the identification with the garments. Because this mind, emotions, body are like a garment that the soul takes. It's like if you want to go deep into the ocean, you cannot go just naked by yourself. You need a suit, because you need that in order to survive in those conditions. The soul also needs a suit, which is the mind, emotions, and body, in order to survive in these very dense conditions. Now, suppose that the person in the ocean forgets who he is, and now he's identified with the suit. And let's suppose that this suit is alive. Like when you are riding a horse. You forget that you are not the horse. Now you identify with the horse, and you wanted to go there, but now the horse wants to go somewhere else, and because you think you are the horse, you will go somewhere else, and then here and there, and then the day ends, and you never went where you wanted to go. You just went where the horse wanted to go. That's more or less what happens with the soul when it identifies with the mind, emotions, and body. It goes where the personality wants. But these, as I was saying, these aspects are only the garments of the real. The problem is that they are alive and they have a will of their own. We say, I like this kind of food, I don't like that other kind of food. Well, it's not ourselves, it's our bodies that like this or that, or the weather. Or we say, I'm irritable, or I'm lazy. It's not ourselves, it's our emotional body. And the same with our mind. So the spiritual path begins to help us recognize what we really are. And that is what gives us freedom. Because when we don't know it, we are slaves of our bodies, of these garments, these living garments of the soul. And if we are identified with them and we are slaves of them, when we die, our consciousness dies with it. Again, this seems something terrible, or may seem something terrible, but the experience is just as when you wake up from a dream and you say, I was never that. I thought I was a soldier. I'm glad that ended, and I was never the soldier. The thing is, as we are going to see, the more we identify with the real in ourselves, the richest is our post-mortem process, what happens after death. Because a person that is absolutely identified with the personality the soul cannot, after the personality dies, the soul cannot get anything from that personality and takes another incarnation, and that personality is like a page, torn off from the book of life. The soul will never remember anything about that personality because there is no element from that personality that the soul could assimilate. But as a person begins to be more and more spiritual, the life of the personality begins to be more and more in tune with the soul. And all the experience of this personality will be absorbed by the soul. With the example of the dream, you may dream that you are the soldier, and that's a useless dream. So you don't get anything from it, and you just forget it. Or you may dream that you are in a place where you learn things. And when you wake up, these things are valuable. So that dream becomes part of you. That dream is meaningful. So it is part of your memory, part of your consciousness, part of your experience. In the same way, our personal life may become part of the soul, but it has to be meaningful to the soul. Otherwise, the soul just forgets it. So it is always a soul that incarnates. And the personality may be very important for that soul or may be irrelevant. So let us see some other aspects related to that, because what is relevant for the soul? When the divine spark sends a ray and generates the soul, at the beginning, that soul, that new soul, and I'm talking about eons ago in the past. This I explained this a little when talking about evolution in previous series, but this was far in the past. When the soul is born, it is pretty much as a baby. It has no awareness of itself. It's a new entity, and that soul is forced by life, by the universal laws, to incarnate, to take a body, to take emotions and the germ of a mind. We are talking about when at the beginning of human evolution. So what happens is that during life, the physical life, we have this kind of animal human being, when humanity is beginning, and the different experiences on the physical plane begin to knock at the door of the soul. The pain, the pleasure, cold, heat, all these sensations that the animal human being is going through begins to produce a response in the soul. It's similar to the baby. It's not very different. The baby, through his or her feeling of hunger and pain and pleasure, it begins to awaken, to develop this awareness. It begins to understand that he or she is a person, little by little. So the soul also, at the beginning of the evolution, is very slow, very mechanical. The different experiences begin to awaken the soul. Now, as the soul awakens more and more, it begins to now develop the sense of I-ness. It begins to understand that the soul, because it's not he or she, is beyond gender, so let's say it is an entity. And during a whole period of evolution, the idea is to make this sense of I-ness stronger and stronger. Again, this happens in our, within the life of a human being. In Theosophy, we say that nature repeats itself on different levels. So what happens with a human being in a single life is more or less what happens with the soul, although on a different level. But the idea is that during a period, the soul, now awakened, begins to generate a strong sense of I-ness. Because remember, we are coming from a state of unconscious unity, and the first step is to generate the idea, I am an entity, I am. So these incarnations, one life after the other, have the purpose of generating a strong idea of I-ness. And humanity at that point begins to be more and more selfish. People, it's just like a baby or a kid, they are very selfish. But that's natural. They want the whole household take care of them. If they want something, they will cry. It doesn't matter if they are in a lecture and they are interrupting. They don't care. It's all about them. And that's perfectly fine because it's part of the process. So during a certain period of evolution, there is this accentuation of the sense of I-ness. And that is fine because it's part of the process. Now, of course, that generates suffering, strife, conflict. But again, that is the way that the soul begins to evolve. Now, at a certain point where this sense of I-ness is strongly developed, now comes a period where the soul has to begin to make it subtler. So, for example, we have a teenager and he's very self-centered. Now he becomes an adult and he cannot be so self-centered. So he has to learn how to work on this sense of I-ness so that his sense of I-ness doesn't go against the common good. So that what he does is not destroying what is around. Of course, some people never learn this and they die in that sense of self-centeredness. But eventually, the idea is that the soul realizes, yes, I am, but I am part of the whole. So that sense of I am, but I'm part of a whole is much subtler than the sense of I am and I don't care about anybody else. Eventually, that sense of I am part of a whole also transmutates into simply I am the whole. I'm not different from the whole. I'm not even a part of the whole. I am the whole. So this process of subtle, making the sense of I-ness subtle and subtle, more subtle, is part of what evolution in the human stage aims at. With each incarnation, we are brought into a particular family, country, a particular gender or sex, a particular situation that is meant to develop what we need to develop in order to help the evolution of the soul. But we can, be led astray by the circumstances, forget that we come here because we are the soul and because we are trying to discover who we really are. And then, as I said, that life may be not meaningful at all for that soul. But the idea is that as we grow into the spiritual approach, the spiritual life, our personal life begins to be more and more meaningful for the soul. And eventually, and I'm going to finish here so we can discuss different aspects of this. Eventually, as the soul begins to realize, while incarnated, while having a body, as consciousness begins to realize that it is a soul and not the body, emotions, and mind, the attachment to the things that belong to the body, to the emotions, and to the mind begins to weaken and eventually disappear. And when we are incarnated, but we are not attached to anything that the world can give us, then incarnation is not necessary anymore. Because that means that the soul attained what it was looking for. The soul wanted to generate first this sense of I-ness, which was necessary to do it through a body that was separate from the rest. And now the soul wanted to make that sense of I-ness subtle, which means that this sense of I-ness doesn't desire anything for himself or herself as separate from the rest. So little by little, the person begins to be more interested in what is the common good, what is necessary for the common good, instead of for myself. So desire disappears in the form that we understand it. There is love, an impersonal love, there is aspiration, there is a desire to do the right thing, if you want to put it in that way, but there is no more personal desire, because a person really is not attached to the body. Of course, we have a body, we have to take care of it, we have to feed it and everything, the same with emotions and mind, but we can take care of it without being self-centered. And that is what the soul more or less is looking for. So once there is no more personal desire, the soul doesn't need to incarnate anymore. There are other stages of evolution for the souls that get to that state, but we are not going to talk about that right now. But in some cases, when we call these people liberated beings, they realize they are not the ego, the body, they realize they are the divine spark, and they are liberated from this wheel of incarnation. But some of them, even though they don't need to incarnate anymore, they remain with the body and they incarnate because they want to help other people to realize who they really are. And these are the people that are the founders of different religions or sages or the great helpers of humanity. They don't need to incarnate anymore out of desire, but they do it just to help us out. And that's the idea in Buddhism, for example, of bodhisattvas, or in Theosophy, the idea of the masters of the wisdom. So that's more or less what I wanted to say about reincarnation. This is like the foundation for what we are going to see in the following talks in this series. And I'm sure that there may be many comments or questions about this. So let us spend some time in a group discussion.
Okay. First, you have to say hello to your mama.
Oh, my mom is there. I have to speak in Spanish because she doesn't know English. Hola, mamá, ¿cómo estás? Okay.
Okay. I understand the part about the spirit and the soul, and then they become the personality, and they enter the body, and as they get more encased in the body, they get more like a part of the concretion of the body, and they take on the experiences that body's going to, be in their environment. I've read a lot on reincarnation, and one of the things that happens that seems to prove to me the case for reincarnation, which I can't really incorporate in what you said totally. There's these stories, and probably a lot of the people here have read, about people that were born that seemed to have memories of prior lives. And one that comes to mind, there was a man in, I think it was India, I read recently. And he was a young boy, and he had all these past life memories. So it took him, he knew the village and everything where he grew up, and he went over there. And I think he even showed him where the money was hidden that he, from his previous life. But kind of more in line with what you're saying there, it seems that what happens always, though, is that they seem to have this retention of a previous existence, but it seems to disappear usually in the early years of their life. Now, does this somehow have to do with like a retardation of the soul still holding on, having a lucid soul memory of the prior existence, and it doesn't get encased into the current thing right away? Follow me?
There are, well, life is very complex, and all these processes are also. And there are many explanations. First, you are maybe referring to the researches of Ian Stevenson. He did a lot of researches about, especially with kids in India. There are several cases. In this particular case, do you remember how the previous personality died? Did this previous personality die in an accident? Or look it up.
I have heard that sometimes if it's a traumatic experience, a traumatic ending. Just a minute.
Oh, because you need the mic so
Yeah.
that people on the internet can hear.
If there's like a traumatic ending, like a bad accident or something, the soul gets trapped in kind of a limbo and it doesn't really realize what happens. And
Yeah. Well, we will see all that, but the idea is that, there are many ways that we may have memories of past lives. And some of them may be true, some of them may not be true. Usually, for example, if a kid dies, before the soul, the idea in the Theosophical view is that the soul really takes control of the body more or less when the boy or girl is about 7 years old. Before that, the body is still, growing and getting fit to receive the soul. And that's why in Christianity they talk about the guardian angels, that they take care of the kid until they are about more or less that age. Because the idea is that kids are protected because the soul is not really taking care of them. It's not that they don't have a soul, but the body cannot respond to that. So if they die, there is no afterlife process because there is nothing that the soul could do through the kid. So they incarnate immediately with the same emotional body, the same mind many times, and they can remember everything that happened before because they have the same mind. They don't have the same brain, but if their brain is receptive, they can remember all because it was not too long ago, and as I said, they have still the same emotional body and mental body. In cases of accidents or traumatic deaths, after these processes, in the afterlife, they tend to incarnate also soon enough so that the memories of the previous life are very fresh and they can be remembered also. The period of time between incarnations in normal people, according to the Theosophical teachings, and we will see why, it's normally about 1,500 years, because there is a lot to do after the physical life. Actually, this physical life is just, a little touch that the soul has on the physical plane, and all the real existence begins after what we call death. So in most people, once they incarnate, there is no remembrance of the previous life that was far way back in time. Now, there can be also some kind of memories that come from the soul and that the mental body and emotional body are receptive to it, and they can remember fragmentary or, in a more or less good way the previous lives. And sometimes also what people think is their previous lives is actually like the memory of the cells, or actually the atoms. In Theosophy, the idea is that atoms have a memory. The cells, everything in the universe has a particular memory. That's why there are some people who are what is called psychometry. They can touch the paper and tell you the history of the tree that the paper was made of. Because the atoms, they get imprinted with every experience the atom went through. And many times, psychometry is the lowest form of clairvoyance. Many people have some kind of psychometry. That's the most common thing. And what they feel was a previous life, many times is a history of their body. The body that was, even in an animal or in another person not connected with the soul, those atoms, because of their affinity, stay more or less together. When the soul incarnates, takes these atoms. The atoms that are right now in my heart, they may have been in a tree, in a rock, or in a mouse. We are.
What would a child prodigy?
Wait.
Oh, I can repeat the question. It was a short one.
What would a child prodigy be? Someone that seems to be very gifted at a young age and it has a lot of knowledge that takes a lifetime.
Yeah, he's asking about
Would
the...
that be somebody that, you know, died in an accident, or would that be Adam?
He's asking about the child prodigies and that at a very young age they have already a lot of knowledge. It may be several cases. One, it could be, you know, a very short incarnation or soon incarnation. But also, if you see many of the prodigies have to do with art or highly intellectual matters or things like that, because in the afterlife processes, if a soul is really, you know, passionate about a particular subject or area of development, that soul may keep on developing that more and more. So even for these 1500 years, and when the soul is born, it acquired such a strong knowledge of that is very easy to imprint it in the new body. So usually most people have a diversity of aims, and they are not like stuck or obsessed with a particular subject after they die.
I'm sure you're
Okay. Okay, 1 minute. We have
Yeah.
another question here.
Yeah. Then we can talk after the talk. But yeah.
You mentioned time frame just a little bit, and I was wondering, is the time frame chronological, or can it sort of jump times?
In the Theosophical, you know, view, there is not this idea that we can incarnate in the past. But again, it's not necessarily that many spiritual movements, they think that because something was not taught through them, then it doesn't exist. And the truth is that truth is wider than any particular teacher or set of teachers could explain. And a teacher decides to explain certain things that teacher thinks are going to be useful for the spiritual life of the person, and they don't have time to speak about everything. So it could be. I personally don't see, it doesn't make much sense to me for several reasons, but it could be, you know.
Okay, we have a question from the internet. Amber asks, is there any evolutionary benefit to having a negative incarnation, such as a murderer? Or would that be one of the incarnations that the soul cannot get anything from?
The benefit is indirect, in the sense that what happens many times is that the soul tries to take control of the personality, especially in souls that are not really skillful. You know, at the beginning, the soul has no idea what the physical plane is, and what the rules of the physical plane are. It's difficult to imagine because we say, well, this is what it is. But for example, I read once at Deva, there was a person that was a clairvoyant and was like kind of communicating to a Deva or angel, we call it in the West. And he realized how different, you know, these angels or Devas or nature spirits see life, because many times accidents or deaths or things like that happen through angels, through Devas. They are in charge of actually producing that. So for a Deva, because it's part of karma, it's part of what has to happen. The Devas, they don't have a personal consciousness. They are like vehicles of the law, of the divine law. So if a person has to die, you know, in the Theosophical view, there is consciousness everywhere, and everything that happens is mediated by consciousness. You know, we could think honey is just a product, but that honey is made by bees, and bees are conscious at their own level. And they always will make honey in the same way, you know, within certain parameters, but they are alive, they are conscious. So many of the processes that happen in our life, they are mediated by different kinds of entities that have their own awareness. So sometimes deaths are mediated by angels or devas. So in this communication, the deva couldn't understand what was wrong in a person killing another person, because he didn't have the idea that you may kill a person for personal reasons, not because you are just the vehicle of the law. So you can see how the two worlds, and if a person follows what a deva is saying, because the gist of what this teacher was saying is, many people are opening themselves up to all kinds of entities, and following the entities is many times foolish because they don't necessarily know what the physical plane is about. And they may say that person has to die, go and kill that person. And actually, many people who are murderers say that they were pushed by some entities. And maybe even if that was a good entity, he didn't have any idea that human beings are not allowed to do that, because we live in a completely different state of consciousness. So the idea is that the soul, at the beginning, has no idea what the physical plane is about. And little by little, with the experiences and making mistakes and learning, that's the way it learns. Let me finish. And so a person may become a murderer simply because the soul didn't know, and by the consequences of that, the soul learns. Or sometimes the soul doesn't know how to control the personality. And it is said that many times the soul says, it's useless, I cannot do anything, and just forgets about the personality. And of course, the personality doesn't have a spiritual guidance and does wrong things. So by the consequences of wrong acts, the soul learns and evolves and grows. So a life of a murderer has a benefit in the sense that the soul learns. Right. But, it's not.
And when you talk about, you're talking about a whole lifetime that a soul might be in an infant stage without, or if the soul leaves, or a personality might be. So you're talking the whole lifetime. Yeah.
It depends. Usually younger souls, they are less skillful to take care, to guide the personality, and also the personality is less receptive to the voice of the soul. So that makes it very difficult for the soul to take care of the...
Brian has a question.
Yeah, I have two questions. It sounds weird. The first maybe dealt with best at another later talk, maybe about karma or something. But the way we're talking about this now, it seems as if the only thing at stake for the soul is a timeline, that it will continue on an inevitable journey towards the divine regardless of the individual's actions. It just might take a longer time. And I'm interested in that. Like, it seems like there would be a repercussion. It wouldn't just be a matter of how long it takes an inevitable journey. Like, can that divine spark burn out, for example? Again, maybe best dealt with at karma.
The second
the other question is, with the divine spark being universal, it being everywhere, that means that this is the only dance there is. Like, the purpose that's being served is through the physical plane and its relation to the higher planes. My issue with that is you use the word need, that the divine spark needs to have the self-awareness. And my question is, if the universal spark is or if it is universal, the divine spark, and that would mean that God had a desire for something that he didn't have outside of him. He wanted to be self-aware. But if God's infinite, where does the desire for something external come from, even the desire for self-awareness? So if it's not in opposition to something, if there's nothing else existing, how could there be knowledge of a need or a desire or a want? I guess.
Yeah, first, the words that we use are human words. So they wouldn't be appropriate, not even to a deva, let alone to the divinity, the divine. So that's a necessary limitation that we have. Second, this divine spark is not absolute, it's not infinite. I mean, it's relatively infinite, but it's already conditioned. In the Theosophical view, what is beyond everything, beyond any need, is the absolute. The absolute, we cannot say anything about the absolute, any need or any this or any that. But as soon as there is manifestation, that means as soon as there is a differentiation, that differentiation is limited because it's not the whole absolute. And it is said that in the Theosophical view, even the divine evolves. Now, when we are talking about the divine, spark needs, or that's how we would say it. The truth is that all we can do is to say what happens. Why, we don't know, and we cannot understand it in this state of consciousness. Although we may have a lot of theories that may satisfy us personally or at the intellectual level, the truth is that we cannot comprehend that. So what it is said is, Blavatsky was asked one time, why does, the divine comes, and she says, I don't know, ask the divine. There is no way I can answer that. And I think that she wasn't just, brushing off the question. She was pointing out that it's not possible. So, but even the divine evolves in the Theosophical view. The only thing that is beyond evolution is the absolute, which is the absolute all. Regarding the other question, we are going to see that, but yeah, eventually it's a question of time, but it is important. I mean, the time is important because if a person is having a nightmare, you know that eventually the person will wake up. But if you see the person screaming, and you will try to wake the person up, as soon as possible. You don't say, oh, well, he will wake up eventually. So we can realize what we are as soon as possible, because in this particular state there is suffering and conflict and limitation. Or you can be eons suffering, because if you are not, if you don't try to be spiritual, you can be eons and eons in this state of suffering when your real nature is bliss. So it is a tragedy, although eventually a soul will, realize its true nature. It is a tragedy when some souls just, keep staying in the realm of suffering more than they should. So, but yeah, eventually in the Theosophical view, every soul will realize the divine nature, because that is the truth, and the truth always prevails.
Okay, Joe has a question, and then we have one more after that.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking earlier about the ego coming down, and one time it may be a man, another time it may be a woman, maybe this type of family, maybe this type of location. What is it that guides the soul as to where it and how it should incarnate? And is that, what bearing does what it brings back with it have on that?
Where to incarnate is unconsciously determined by the soul and consciously guided by the lords of karma, the entities that are working within karma. So, in other words, where we are going to be incarnated depends on what we did in all the previous lives. But the soul, unless the soul is really evolved, has not the ability to choose consciously, to know what's the right way or the right family or the right country. So there are angels, let's say, that will guide the souls here and there according to the karma. They don't make the decision, the ultimate decision, because they follow whatever you created in the past. But they are the ones that guide, and not that. But as you get closer to the end of evolution, the soul becomes wiser and wiser and can take care of these processes. Okay. Yeah. That at a certain point there is no need for any external guidance.
Okay, can you touch on the Theosophical view of transmigration?
Yeah, that's the idea, whether can a human soul incarnate in an animal. And in the Theosophical view, animals don't reincarnate because they don't have a soul in the sense, the word soul is more complex. The animals have a kind of soul, but it's a group soul. They don't have an individual soul, and they are evolving to acquire an individual soul. And it is the individual soul, the one that reincarnates, the permanent element in the reincarnation. So technically speaking, animals don't reincarnate. And once there is a soul, a human soul, there is no use in reincarnating in animals, because the soul already, or the consciousness already went through the animal kingdom and transcended it. So there is no use for that. Now, as I said, the lower vehicles, the body, the emotions, even some lower aspects of the mind, while a soul is going through the post-mortem processes, what was my body, the matter there, can be used by animals, especially if my tendencies were very animalistic. And then when the soul incarnates again, many times it attracts the more or less the same matter that it was using, and that matter is more animalistic than before because it was used by an animal. For the animal, it is perfectly fine to live in this physiological state, but not for the human being. So this soul will take a body that is in a certain way lower than it was before, and the body has a memory of having been an animal. Whether the soul knows it consciously or not, that's a different thing. But some people may remember part of the experiences of the matter of their bodies when they were in animals. And that's why there is the idea that we can reincarnate in animals, but it's not really the soul. At least that's how the Theosophical literature explains this question.
Okay, another question from the internet. Lou wants to know, in the event that the soul surrendered or divested itself of the actions of the personality, would it not still be karmically responsible?
In what sense disconnect?
I think he's talking about once you get away from the personality, the soul remembers who the soul really is, so it brushes off the personality.
Or maybe it's talking when I said that the soul says, I cannot dominate the personality, so
No.
let it go.
No, I get the impression he's talking about before that.
If it is that case, the soul, after the soul transcends the personality, any personality that the soul takes will be as good an expression of the soul as possible through a physical body and an emotional body. If the question is regarding the first example, when the soul says, I cannot control the personality and lets it go, of course the soul is responsible for that. And that's the way the soul learns, no, I cannot do this. The plane in which the soul lives is a very spiritual plane, and no soul really enjoys too much being incarnated if it can choose. But there is also the desire for, it's like if you meditate, sometimes you get in a very peaceful state, and then you come back to your normal after a while. You come back to your normal state of consciousness and maybe to conflict or suffering. And you say, why? Why my consciousness didn't stay there that was so peaceful? But there is in us a thirst for experience until the soul really doesn't desire any kind of conditioned experience. But even if the soul is in a very blissful plane, there is still this thirst for experiences that pushes the soul to incarnate. Although there is in the young souls a tendency not to get too much engaged with the physical plane, eventually they learn, it's an expression of myself, I have to take care of that.
Okay, we're looking good.
Yeah, of course there are many things, and we are going to touch on all these subjects in the next talks, and there are many things that, as we see the post-mortem processes, you will see the reason for some of the things we are saying now that may sound strange, but we'll advance little by little during the talk.
Next week it's
about karma.
Then life and death.
Yeah, then the process of dying and the first stages of the post-mortem life, and then in the last one, the last stages of the post-mortem life and the process of reincarnation, how that happens.